I'm Mike,
And I'm Amber. Welcome to the Covenant Chronicles,
where we tell you the truth about relationships.
giving you the tools to build the foundation you always needed.
Welcome back to the Covenant Chronicles.
Hi, guys.
We covered some things in the last couple episodes talking about different aspects of trauma and how it affects, your relationship and where some of that can come from in your childhood or past relationships. And, Amber brought up a good point about communicating your wants and needs, which can definitely be a challenging thing. There's many parts of it that you have to overcome to be able to effectively communicate, right? You have to overcome the trauma, which we talked about. You have to overcome some of your fears, which a lot of that has to do with your past. And then you also have to understand how to communicate, right? And there's a bunch of pieces to the puzzle that come in there too that people don't realize when navigating communication with the partner, because it can be everything from, the style of communication, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. It can be the differences in tone. It can be, all these factors that come into play when you're trying to communicate and understanding your partner, attachment styles, all those sort of things that will affect how you communicate. And I wanted to talk about that and talk about some of the details of how to actually communicate your wants and needs. And I feel that, women and men both struggle with this for various reasons. And, with women, a lot of it has to do with not feeling heard, not feeling seen, not feeling like their partner really cares, or, other things from their past, whether it's something in their childhood that led them to believe that, their wants or needs aren't important. And, men deal with very similar stuff, but the way it gets talked about on either side is very different. And what's really interesting, though, is when you break down the science behind it, is that men and women struggle with a lot of the same things and a lot of the same triggers that keeps them from being able to effectively communicate their wants and needs. So, Amber, what was one of your biggest challenges that you faced when trying to figure out how to actually communicate your wants and needs? What was that something that you discovered, that one big thing that kept you from getting over that hurdle to basically say, hey, no, it's okay to tell him I need time or affection or touch or intimacy or whatever it was at the time that you were needing? What was that big thing that you had to face for a long time that kept you from getting to that point?
Eh, That's a good question, actually. I'll be honest, I think that in our relationship, it was being comfortable enough to take down that wall, like feeling safe enough, I guess. It also just took repetition for me because it's definitely not something that I was used to doing. Know that I didn't do it hardly ever in my marriage. So coming into a relationship with you, like, yeah, I had worked on healing parts of myself before I came into a relationship with you, but even having worked on myself in a lot of ways, like coming into a new relationship, there's still hurdles and things that you have to overcome. Again, trying to figure out yourself in this new thing. So we've touched on it in the past couple episodes, but we definitely struggled with our communication with each other for a while. And I think I tried to express some of those wants and needs to you, but I don't know that I was effectively doing it. And I don't know if we were in a good place to hear each other at that point. But to be honest, I think it almost took a lot of us falling apart and then rebuilding to get to a point of me being able to actually tell you my wants and needs and feeling like you were hearing them and that it was safe for me to tell you those things. Not to throw it back on you, but I think that in a lot of ways, I felt whenever I would tell you things, it wasn't always heard,
Mhm.
or maybe you didn't know what to do with it at that point either. And so it just felt like I wasn't being heard. But instead of like reverting back to old me and just being like, oh, whatever, I just won't express my wants and needs. This is one of those points at which I had to overcome my own trauma and be like, listen, either we're going to figure this out together and I'm going to be able to talk to you about these things and we're going to be able to communicate about them and it's going to actually work for us or it's not. But like I'm not going back and hiding in myself again. That
No, yeah, no, that's you gave a couple really important things, and I'll touch on this a little bit, but I really think that we need to do a whole episode on listening and actually hearing your partner, right? But that's a really important piece to the puzzle, right? Is going back to the men leading the relationship and them having to really guide through that and create a safe emotional space for their partner, and the vast difference that that actually makes, right? Of we've experienced both sides of it in our relationship, and we've experienced it in the past with other relationships as well too, is creating or having a safe space to do that, right? And that's where you just express that of for a while there, I didn't feel seen and heard. I felt like it wasn't heard when I tried to express these things, and I also didn't know how to express them. And then at a certain point you said, okay, I'm going to be able to express these things in my relationship, and we need to figure this out, right? And that's a really important part I want to touch on, because I think that's a lot of parts where, or a big part of where, a lot of women struggle in their own journey, is they get to that point of just being complacent, right? And that's where having that confidence to step up and say, okay, enough is enough. I deserve to be heard too, right? And getting over those past traumas and things that they've been through to say, no, I deserve this. I deserve to be heard too, right? Do you remember when you first thought about that, or like the internal conversation you had with yourself where that switch flipped and you said, okay, I'm going to be heard. I deserve this.
It was definitely at like probably our lowest point in our relationship. And really, we had gotten to a place where I almost feel like we just were not communicating. And we definitely were not communicating effectively. And so I think I had a moment of like, am I going to choose to become the old me again? Or am I going to really step up in this and have self-confidence and self-worth and in this moment and be like, listen, I'm not going to accept feeling like I used to. And I don't want to be in a relationship in which I feel how I used to feel, which was not heard and not seen. And like I couldn't express those things. And I do take like responsibility in the fact that I didn't ever express those things and maybe things would have been different if I did, but I also didn't necessarily feel safe. And when you're talking about like men creating that safe space, I do think that's super important. But there is a point at which I think as we're healing, like, individually, you have to choose that for yourself too. And either in that moment, your partner's gonna rise up and meet you, or you're gonna have to continue doing the work for yourself and continue working on yourself and hope that they follow, or eventually things just might not work out anymore. But I know we had a tough time there for a little bit rebuilding things, but when I
Mhm.
told you, like, I'm not okay with this, I'm not gonna revert back to the old me, you did step up and you did change a lot of things, and I did feel like, "Hey, he's actually hearing me, he's actually listening to me, like, I'm not just being ignored in this moment," or, um he's listening, but I don't think he really heard me. No, I felt like you actually heard me and you actually wanted to step up in that moment also and provide a safe space for me, but also hear what my wants and needs were and try to provide those things for me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, as humans, we tend not to change without a major catalyst, right? Men and women are very similar in that aspect, but we're also very different in the sense that I believe that women can hit a point of being fed up, right?
Mhm.
Men have a tendency to get very complacent for a long period of time until something triggers them to change. They have this catalyst, right? And I can say that, things changed for me massively when I went through everything I went through in my previous marriage and previous relationship. And when that was coming to an end, it triggered a lot. But I found after a while, and the journey that I went through, and then we get into this new relationship, I also wasn't necessarily looking for a I guess a permanent relationship at the time, right? Like, let's be honest,
Yeah.
we talked about that, right? Like, I was just having fun, and it took me a while to actually trigger that switch of, like, us playing house to you saying, "Hey, look, I'm not good playing house anymore. I want this, and if you don't, that's okay, but this is what I want, and this is what is needed in the relationship." And what's interesting about that is, it created this catalyst. And that's where I think a lot of men, we tend to either, like you said, rise or we don't. And what's interesting is, due to my past, I use that as fuel. I wasn't, our relationship wasn't necessarily in a great place at the time, but I don't feel that I was at rock bottom. It was a reminder of, like, hey, you've done all these great things in your life, but you're kind of slacking in the relationship category, right? We
Mhm.
need to put a little more attention on this and a little less attention maybe in this other, department here or there, what have you. And I think for men, that's an important thing to think about is, you know, we need to be able to communicate our needs as well, but we also have to hear our partner's needs. And we tend to get inside of our head too much, and we think that, leadership is about this, I don't know how to say it, masculine, strong, like forceful type, I guess, experience, or this forceful action, right?
Mhm.
But it's not. It's being able to, effectively understand your partner and say, okay, this is the direction we need to go, right?
Mhm.
And when we think of leadership and leading the relationship, we think of, oh, well, I have to, be at the forefront of everything all the time. And we do, but we also have to understand that there's a partnership to this, and there's a side of things that you're going to see that we won't see. And we have to be able to hear those things, right? And what builds a solid foundation in a close relationship, for us, it wasn't only our faith, right? Because when we did put our faith first and, you know, put God at the center of our relationship and said, okay, this is going to be our number one, but it was actually listening to each other and that curiosity that we talked about of, okay, I want to actually learn what this person wants in a relationship, right? Because I don't feel that we did that for a long time. And that was part of, the issue there is that we learned stuff about each other and we had that fun, crazy honeymoon first dating stage, but we didn't learn each other deep enough to understand each other's needs, right?
Mhm.
And when we started to do that, and when you express those feelings to me, actually hearing you and saying, okay, it's time to make a decision. Are we going to keep playing house or are we going to make this serious, right? And sitting down and analyzing what I really wanted, it's like, okay, now let's do this thing, right? So we did. And by doing so and taking and saying, okay, what are your needs, right? And not just, you know, listening to the things you would say, right? Because that's where men screw it up a lot. We listen to our partner and she's pissed off about us not taking out the trash. Like, she asked us to an hour before and we just got home and we wanted to sit out on the couch and just kick our boots off for a little bit because we had a 10 or a 12-hour day and this and that and da da da. And we didn't take the trash out. Now she's nagging and blah, blah, and we have these really poor internal conversations with ourselves, which, is a whole nother topic about changing our internal conversations with in ourselves about our partner. But it's not about the trash.
Mhm.
It's about the waking up and leaving the house before anybody's up. It's about coming home and sitting in your own head and ignoring your family. And then the fact that your partner is looking for some sort of connection. And, for a week prior, she came up to you and she tried to cuddle with you on the couch while you were watching your favorite sports, football or hockey or basketball or whatever you're into, or car racing, or you were on your phone, doom scrolling social media, and she tried to come and sit with you and have a conversation, and you kind of blew her off, and or this, that, and the other. And then pretty soon, she wants to get intimate with you, but then you go to bed because you're tired, because you have to get up at, the butt crack of dawn before the rooster crows the next morning. And then it's, hey, can you take out the trash? And an hour later, you're still on your phone doom scrolling. And then she's pissed off that the trash wasn't taken out. And you're all annoyed now because you think she's pissed off about something so dumb because the trash is a small thing. And really, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with the fact that you haven't listened to her,
Mhm.
right? Like you haven't been listening to what she's been saying. And, those times she asked you to, you know, hey, come do this. Hey, do you want to sit down with me and do this? Hey, I want to talk to you about something. All this stuff was her saying, hey, I need connection. Hey, I need conversation. Hey, I need intimacy with you. Hey, I need, physical touch or, just physical presence, whatever it is, right? Or
Mhm.
or mental or emotional presence, right? And all too often we sit here and we don't listen, right?
Mhm.
And then it creates this compounded effect of, well, now, you feel like you're getting ignored. So then you convince yourself and you start having this internal conversation of, well, my needs don't matter.
Mhm.
And then you forget how to communicate your needs. And then pretty soon this relationship just ends up in this roommate place, right? All because typically, right, it's the guy, and we always want to complain, right, about, what do you always hear married guys complain about? Oh man, well, the blowjob stopped. Oh man, she doesn't sleep with me anymore. Well, when's the last time you listened to her needs, right? If that's your need, when's the last time you actually listened to her needs? What are her needs,
Mhm.
right?
I think that's a good point, is like figuring out what your needs actually are. Because I think so many of us act- have needs, but we don't actually know what they are. Right.
Hmm.
And so you're kind of going around placing expectations on someone, but you're not really fully understanding why you feel that way. or that you are missing something or needing something. And so it does turn into this whole like you're having a conversation in your head, I'm having a conversation in my head, we're disconnected, and neither of us knows why the other one is mad at each other in this moment. But if we could realize that, it's really that I feel super disconnected and just need some time with you, like some actual present time where we're spending time together, whatever, um, then this wouldn't actually be an issue, right? But I think that you have to get to a place of knowing what your needs actually are, and then being able to communicate those things with your partner. And like you said, then your partner being receptive and hearing those things, but also hearing everything, right? Because there's been plenty of times where we've had conversations with each other and you'll just be like, I know you miss me, babe. And I'm like, I didn't even say that to you, but you got that out of what I was saying.
Right.
Because like there's a certain point at which like I need the connection. And when I start, you know, being disconnected from you, now you can realize like, oh, I'm probably just missing you in this moment. And that's why you're frustrated about something. So I think being able to like sit down with yourself and really figuring those things out so that you can communicate them with your partner is a super important step for growth in your relationship. Because like me figuring out that I really need and want physical touch, like it's a major thing for me. And when we're lacking that in our relationship, I do feel super disconnected from you. But I had to take the time to figure out that that was actually a thing.
Right. Yeah.
Because yeah, for a long time I didn't even realize that I did want physical touch in a relationship. Like that wasn't to me. I was like, I don't really like physical touch until I realized like, hey, I actually really do. And when I don't have that, like when we're not taking the time to just sit next to each other on the couch and like just literally hold hands or touch each other, like that's important to me. And if we're not doing that, then I start feeling disconnected.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point about that too, about identifying your needs, right? Because we think that our needs are one thing, especially based on our environment, right? If we're not in a good place in our relationship, or maybe we're in a fight or flight or like a survival mode in our relationship, right? We can't even begin to identify those needs.
Yeah.
And so the problem then becomes, you think that, well, I don't like this, I don't like this, I only like these things, and you tell yourself this. When in reality, those internal conversations that you're telling yourself have to do with the fact that you haven't been getting your needs for so long, you've convinced yourself that you don't need them. When you really start actually figuring yourself out, doing the internal work and understanding, oh, I act like this, or I do this, or I have this reaction or this response to not getting this because this is important to me, then you start to figure those out. And when you can express those to your partner, when you start figuring them out about yourself, right? Like you said, you have to understand that, because you can't express your needs to your partner if you don't truly know what they are. If you
Right.
think you know, right, that's one thing. But if you actually know, that's a completely different ballgame. And when you can actually express those to your partner, and the flip side is, like you said, your partner actually listens, right? That's the difference. And I don't know how many people are going to catch that about what you said. When you talked about, you'll have a conversation, I'll say, hey, I know you miss me, babe. or I know I miss you, you
Yeah.
miss me. I get it. Like, we've been super busy lately. We've been disconnected. That's typically how the conversation goes. But the important part there to understand is that you in those moments are typically not saying, "Hey, I miss you. I really need to spend time with you."
Mhm.
Right? Now, don't get me wrong. You've gotten really good about that
Yeah.
compared to, a couple years ago when we weren't communicating well about our needs. And you would actually say, just try to find ways to express it. And now you can actually come out and say, we've been really distant the last couple of days. We've both been super busy, or you've been super busy. I know there's been all this stuff going on. I just really need some connection tonight. Right.
Mhm.
But a lot of those times, those that I'm saying, hey, I know you miss me, the conversation isn't that.
Yeah.
The conversation is expressed frustration about something that may not even be related to us, right?
Yeah.
It could be something completely different about you being frustrated about me going and doing something, or you being frustrated about something going on with the house, or you being frustrated about whatever, right?
Yeah.
But by the way you're talking and the things you're saying, I understand, okay, she's getting frustrated because she misses me, she needs connection, and maybe in this moment doesn't know how to express that. But actually understanding you and knowing how to listen, I can identify those things, right?
Right.
And then the flip side also comes from the man in the relationship of actually being able to express it, right? Because if we don't express our needs, how are we really leading the relationship, and how do we expect, because guys love to complain about that.
Yeah.
Oh, why can't she just be clear? Well, are you being clear? Are
Yeah.
you telling her what you need? And not in a when you're pissed off and frustrated,
Right.
but are you actually understanding your own needs, why you have those needs, and
Mhm.
actually clearly communicating that, right? Because we don't.
Mhm.
Guys don't. We bury that stuff because society tells us not to say anything, not to do anything, not to have emotions, and we just need to bury it and be tough. Or they tell us to be an emotional wreck, like a teenage girl that just got her first period, right? Like there's no in between of like, hey, this is how to actually be, which is really the correct answer. But that's the flip side to it is, as men, we also have to do our part to actually understand our own needs and say, oh, okay, if I'm, the biggest one, like I said, is sex. That seems to be a huge topic, and especially with married couples, and the guy not getting half the time, or I'd say most of the time, if that's the issue, step your game up, handle your stuff, because that's the problem, right?
Mhm.
Because I promise you, if you are handling your stuff, it's not going to be an issue for her, and she's going to be all over you. But do you actually understand why you need it? And not just because you're a guy,
Yeah.
right? Do you actually understand why that's your need? Or potentially, right? Let's go even deeper. Words of affirmation is huge for most guys
Yeah.
because we don't ever hear it in society,
Yeah.
right? So, do you actually understand that when your partner says, hey, I'm proud of you, and that's something that you need on a regular basis, or at least time to time, right? And
Mhm.
not because you need validation, because that's a whole different thing, but because that's one of your needs.
Mhm.
Do you understand why?
Mhm.
Right? Do you know how to communicate that to your partner and say, I really like it when you tell me that you're proud of me. It makes me feel really good, and it makes me feel like I'm successfully taking care of my family the way that I seek to do every day.
Mhm.
Right? And I don't think that we do. I don't think that most men do. I think that most men just bury it, then they get frustrated, and then they start having these horrible internal conversations and convincing themselves of all these horrible things about their relationship or their partner, when it can be really solved by him figuring out his crap, why that's that way, and then actually communicating effectively.
Well, yeah, because if you are leading the relationship, which is doing those things,
Hmm.
telling your partner your wants and needs and expecting the same in return, like you're leading that in the relationship. You are showing up in a manner that's like, hey, this is important. It needs to be important for both of us. But when that's really not the case, then that's when you get into these situations where like the woman doesn't feel safe to tell you her wants and needs because she doesn't know what your wants and needs are. And you're not showing up in a way that tells her that that's important to you.
Mm.
And it really does end up in this cycle of frustration to where, I was listening to a podcast today and they were talking about like the guy feels like he needs to be the protector all the time.
Mm.
But when was the last time that you didn't feel safe? Like men generally always feel safe. Like you always feel like you could step up and take someone down,
Yeah.
like that's just how guys are. Women, on the other hand, like can probably tell you a story of like not feeling safe within the last day to a week. Like we just are wired differently in that sense. And so if you're not creating an environment where we feel safe and feel safe to communicate our wants and needs to you, it's just going to be this endless spiral of both of you not ever getting what you desire out of a relationship. And you bring up the topic of sex, and that is a huge one. And I think that for women, we don't realize or make the connection that, like, that's not really something that we desire if we don't feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's just so much into safety. We're going to have to do another podcast about that at a different time.
For
But
sure.
In that, it does lead to this situation where, like, typically speaking, guys are not getting the amount of sex that they want. But it's because the woman doesn't feel safe in her relationship. She doesn't feel connected to you. She doesn't feel all of these things that we need to feel to be open, which is what needs to happen to have sex, really.
Oh,
I
for
think
sure.
that's a whole.
It's a whole nother podcast, 100%. But that's, at the end of it, the summary of that is, and now they're going to hear it from the guy side. So it's not this, oh, woman, just, what? No, no. If you're not getting what you want, man, step your crap up, straight up, because you're obviously failing in multiple ways if that's an issue. But with that being said, what's something that you can do with your partner in the next 24 hours to identify a need of yours and communicate that, right? That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Figure out something, write it down, put it in a text, put it in a note in your phone, whatever it is. Take that, identify why that is your need, spend the time thinking about it, self-reflecting, journaling, whatever you have to do to get to that root cause. Identify your need, why that's a need, and sit down with your partner and say, hey, can I have a few minutes of your time? This is important. I want to talk about this, and talk them through that.
Yeah, for sure. It's important that you take the time to figure those things out, but I think that's a really great like step that you should take in the next day. Just identify one one basic thing. Like we all have way more needs than just one thing, but like if you can identify just one thing that you are able to really narrow down and tell your partner and be like, this is super important to me, and if you did it, this is how I would feel, or whatever the case is, but it's going to bring a deeper level of connection in your relationship just doing that. Even just identifying one thing.
Yeah, 100%. On that note, go figure out your one thing, communicate that to your partner. And if it doesn't go the way you think you want it to, don't worry. We're going to give you the knowledge in upcoming episodes of how to overcome those communication challenges too. All right. You guys do your one thing, talk to your partner. We want to hear about it. Until next time. Thanks, guys.
See you next time. Bye.